I'm joined now by Andrea Hailey, the CEO of Vote.org. Andrea, thank you so much for your time and for joining us. Today's marches really show an incredible amount of support for the John Lewis Voting Act, the For the People Act, but at this point there doesn't seem to be a whole lot of chance that these will pass without filibuster reform. So do you agree with that, and how do you move forward?
Absolutely. I think that with thousands of people showing up in Washington and all across the nation demanding voting rights, that our leaders in Congress would be wise to listen to their constituents. These bills are overwhelmingly popular with the American population. Everyone wants their freedom protected and freedom to the ballot box protected, and we're going to have a carve-out in the filibuster to make that happen. But what I definitely know is that a Senate custom or procedure should not get in the way of everyone's ability to vote and participate in our democracy.
Well, marchers are demanding that elected officials protect democracy and denounce voter suppression. They also want to make D.C. a state and ensure fair and easy access for everyone to be able to vote. So how do events like the ones we're seeing across the country today add public pressure?
I think that, it's one thing for elected officials to see the polling results and to know that these bills are overwhelmingly popular. It's a whole nother thing for them to see thousands of Americans in the streets saying that they will hold everyone accountable if voting rights legislation is not passed in this country. We know that there are so many bills crisscrossing the nation and the states right now trying to roll back protections and freedoms to the ballot box. And I think that this show of force in the streets really lets people know that voting rights is not optional, the time is now, and that this is urgent, and that we need to pass this legislation.
Yeah, let's talk about those efforts, because there are at least 17 states that are passing laws trying to restrict voting. And a New York Times article from this week says these new restrictions would never have made it this far in the 60s because of a ruling by the Supreme Court in 2013 saying racial discrimination was no longer a threat in the U.S., thus lifting the requirement that states with a history of racial discrimination had to get approval from the Justice Department before changing voting laws. So are we going backwards?
Yes, I mean, the gutting of the Voting Rights Act by the Supreme Court is tragic. We know that as soon as that happened, there are states that went back to their previous discriminatory practices. We saw hundreds of polling locations across the southeastern seaboard of the United States closed down. We saw rules change, and I think that it's really important we give teeth back into the Voting Rights Act by passing the John Lewis voting rights legislation. So yes, we've gone backwards. We've taken some steps backwards, but we have a solution. And the solution is for the Senate to pass the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. And I think every individual out there should be calling their senators and demanding that right now.
I was speaking with the Bishop William Barber this morning on MSNBC. He's one of the organizers of the Make Good Trouble rally here in D.C., and he said, and it's something you agree with, that these voter suppression efforts are really short-sighted because even though right now minority groups would be disproportionately impacted, in the end it's going to impact everyone. Can you explain that?
Yeah, I think it's important for us all to realize that our faiths are all intertwined. When you're talking about rolling back early voting, that's something that affects everyone. When you're rolling back vote by mail affects everybody. Drop boxes, that affects everyone. So making voting registration more difficult affects everybody. Not being able to have food and water while you're waiting in 8-hour lines, that affects every single individual. So our faiths are all tied together here in our democracy. It's up to us to see if we're going to be able to realize this great dream, what our country can be, and if we're going to have a healthy and thriving democracy that protects freedom to the ballot box for everyone, or if we're going to descend into something where, politicians get to pick and choose which voters actually get to have their voices heard, which we know affects everything that happens in your city, your state, and in the nation.
All right, well, Andrea Hailey, we appreciate your time on such a busy day. Thanks so much for joining us. And still ahead, meltdowns